Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this presentation of We Were There. I am a member of the Tribute Center. My name is Judith Pucci. I am one of quite a few tribute guides now. And this afternoon, you're going to hear stories told to you by two of my fellow guides. And these stories go beyond the historic events of September 11th. Instead, they explore the personal costs of that day. So let me introduce you to your two storytellers today. Next to me are Tom Grassi and Peter Rinaldi. Both Tom and Peter worked for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The Port Authority is the organization that manages the World Trade Center. And Tom is an architect, right there, and Peter at the end is an engineer. As an architect, Tom has been involved in all of the rebuilding going on outside since the attacks, whereas Peter, who was the Assistant Director of Engineering for the Port Authority, he contributed to both the cleanup and the rebuilding efforts. Both Tom and Peter worked in the North Tower. That was the first building to be attacked that morning. We're going to begin with Tom, so I'm going to just very briefly set the scene for you. The time is 8:46 a.m. And this is when the first plane, hijacked Flight 11, is crashed into the North Tower. About 1,300 people, a little over, are above the point of impact. All of these people die. Access to the elevators and stairways was destroyed by the plane. Tom's office was about 10, 11 floors below impact, so he at least had the chance of surviving. And I'll let him take it from there.
Thanks. There were a lot of great things about working in the World Trade Center, which I did for about 15 years before 9/11. I think my favorite was the views. I never got tired or used to the views, especially to the south from the North Tower. You had a great view of the South Tower and Lower Manhattan and the harbor. And especially at sunset, at certain days, the whole scene would sort of glow a pinkish red, and the South Tower would glow, and the goings-on in the harbor. And in the middle of all was always the Statue of Liberty, kind of standing tall, and no matter what the conditions, it was always there and never gave up, and was always a symbol right in the middle of that great view. On the morning of September 11th, 2001, at 8:46 in the morning, I was on the 82nd floor of Tower 1. I had just said good morning to a coworker named Alan, and he was a Vietnam veteran. We had just said our good mornings. Out of nowhere came a thunderous bam, an impactful noise that shook the building and shook all of us. Alan yelled, "Hit the dirt, hit the dirt." There was no question or thought, though. We all immediately started to run out of the building. It was obviously a plane that hit, as we said, 100 to 150 feet above our heads. Maybe the distance from home plate to second base on a baseball field was how far we were. We immediately ran for the stairs, which were filled with a lot of panic and excitement and shouting at first. But things, I must say, calmed down pretty quickly. It was clear that something enormous had just happened, but the lights were on, the air conditioning was on, we were okay. What we had to do now was take our time and get out. So things calmed down pretty quickly. People were generally encouraging. The descent out was pretty slow at times. It was almost one step at a time. Sometimes we weren't moving at all. We came to a certain point where somebody had a door held open and they were handing out soft drinks. So they were giving out soda, and I took a pinkish colored Snapple and figured I'd have it later once we got outside and had lunch or something. I'd save my Snapple. We continued our slow walk downward, and at some point, maybe I was in the floors like the 40s or 50s when the firefighters started to appear. So we stayed to our right to let them pass by. We're sort of encouraging them and saying, "Hey, thanks for your help, guys. We really appreciate it." And they were telling us, "Hang in there, you'll all get out." And one of one of them and I sort of made eye contact, and he said, "Don't worry, the line moves a lot quicker once you get closer to the bottom." And I said, "All right, thanks a lot, thanks for your help." And they were exhausted and out of breath and breathing heavily. So I said, "I think you need this more than I do." And I gave him my Snapple, and he said thanks, and he continued walking upward. Our slow walk out continued, but there was no sense of panic. I took a quick break, called my wife, told her what was going on. And I got down to around, I think I was on the 7th floor. A flow of water had started to come down the stairs. The residue of either the firefighters, broken water pipes, sprinkler lines maybe, but we were all sort of ankle deep in a murky water, and maybe starting to get a little bit impatient. It had been about an hour and 15 minutes trying to get out. And then there came another big noise, similar but different than the first one, sort of a rumbling ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-bum type noise. And I looked up, I felt and sounded like the stairs were collapsing. I looked up to see, and a big gush of smoke came in from below, a thick black smoke. That the lights went out, and everything went into total darkness. You couldn't breathe, so I sort of pulled up my undershirt to try and breathe through my shirt. And a swarm of people from below with the big cloud of thick smoke started shouting, run up, there's bombs down here, run back up." And I can't say we ran upstairs, but I sort of surged upstairs with this crowd of people. We went up maybe a flight or two in the water and the darkness and the smoke. And people up above start yelling, "You can't come up here, the fires are spreading, you got to get down, get down." So the people up above are yelling, "Run down," and the people below are yelling up. I heard somebody saying, "Easy, easy, take it easy, take it easy." And I had a quick thought that that's a familiar voice, and I realized it was me. I was shouting without even really being conscious of it. I had a quick thought that my sons had been there over the summer to spend the day and have lunch, and I thought, boy, I'm glad they're not here today. So there was really nowhere to go as people were saying run down and run up. So I sort of took a break and went into an open doorway for a minute, breathing through my T-shirt. I saw then a flashlight sort of down the corridor, and somebody said, "This way, this stair is open, you can get out over here." So in total darkness, I couldn't see anything but this sort of beam of a flashlight. I followed that. And it was some firefighters, almost like the daisy chain, so to speak, kind of leading the way for us to get out. They stayed behind with their lights and said, "Down there, just follow those lights." And we'd either follow somebody who was walking or just run for the next light. I got out on what was the 2nd floor, still thinking that once I got out, everything would be fine and perfectly normal. So I was shocked when the door opened and I was in the lobby of the World Trade Center to see that it felt like I was in a time machine and sort of transported 5,000 years in the future. It was dark, and still we were in this smoky cloud. The building was sort of falling, pieces were falling, there was debris all around, because obviously that thunderous second noise we heard was the Tower 2 collapsing right next door. So we were inside that smoke cloud, and all you could still hear or all you could see was the flashlight saying, "Get out that way, get out as fast as you can, run for cover, and get out." It was difficult to run because of all the debris all around, so you could sort of tromp your way out, but there wasn't exactly running. They said, run under the overhangs, and don't look up and don't look back. So I did. I came down what is now called the Survivor's Stair, which is displayed here at the museum. And on the street, I met with a couple of coworkers as we looked back at the towers and could see only Tower 1 was there. And we were debating if we couldn't see Tower 2 only because of this big cloud of smoke. Some people were saying Tower 2 had collapsed, which we couldn't believe. And as we looked up at our tower, or as I was looking up at it, it sort of twisted a little bit and then began to slowly crumble to the ground. I met up with those coworkers, and we walked through Manhattan, about a 3-mile walk. People were taking our photographs as we were covered with dust and smoke. We made our way to a ferry, because we lived in New Jersey, to get there. And we got on the ferry, and this was 7 or 8 hours later. We're making our way across the Hudson River. And I had to work my way on the ferry to look back at the skyline. I just had to get another look, or a look, at what was going on. And most of Manhattan to the north was completely normal. And then there was the one spot where the World Trade Center had been that morning, which now was just this gigantic plume of black smoke. And a little further to the right, there was the Statue of Liberty, still there. Through it all, it still hadn't given up, and that statue was still there, and I knew we wouldn't give up either. And within a couple of days, it was a great pleasure to be back to work, working on what we were going to do with the site. And it's still my pleasure to be here working on the rebuilding effort ever since. Thank you.
People are often surprised to hear, and I understand it, how many survived who were at the Trade Center that morning. The number from the Twin Towers alone is about 14,000 people. So Tom was among them. 84 of his colleagues, however, did die in that building. After the attacks came the massive recovery and cleanup effort, which is where Peter's story begins. He was assigned to the engineering team responsible for supervising the clearing away of 1.8 million tons of debris. Peter.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thanks for braving the cold, all of you, today here. And Tom and I were colleagues at the Port Authority. You can see he's dressed in a suit. I'm not. He's still working. I'm retired. So that's to give you an idea of. We were just talking about that. I worked in the North Tower, just below Tom on the 72nd floor. A few floors down. I was not in the tower on that day because on that Friday afternoon I'd finished up signing drawings for a major engineering project and left with my wife on vacation for the Outer Banks of North Carolina. And that's where I was on Tuesday when my son called me and said a plane hit the World Trade Center. And I watched the events unfold and then came back very shortly thereafter to temporary offices. We were trying to get staff together in New Jersey, and then the chief engineer asked me to come down to the site in September to be part of the emergency response team and provide aid and technical assistance to the city, which was dealing with this catastrophe. So what I'd like to do is describe to you a little bit today what it was like to be here during that period of time, and also maybe give you a little background into one of the artifacts that's down in the museum, which is called the Last Column. So I arrived here in September on the site, having left the building on that Friday, and was introduced to walking around what was the World Trade Center site. 16-acre site, maybe 700 feet by 1,000 feet. For those of you from overseas, 200 meters by 300 plus meters. It's a huge, huge site. And I just left the buildings a few days before that when they were intact. And my colleagues, 84 of our colleagues, some close friends that we lost that day. Matter of fact, the last person I spoke to as I left on vacation was a friend of mine called Steve Fiorelli, who we worked close together. He called me up to wish me a goodbye. Have a good vacation. I'll see you when you get back. Conversation you may have many times with your colleagues or loved ones you're leaving. I never spoke to him again. So that was one of the downsides of 9/11. We lost some friends and colleagues. And, you know, I always say that you spend a lot of time with your family, but if you think about it, probably when you're at work, you spend more time with people you work with than you do with your family when it comes down to it, and you think about it, you know, because you're sleeping when you're home part of the time, but at work you're there 8 to 10 hours or something. So you get to know people pretty well, and they become friends as well as colleagues. That day I came back to the site for the first time in September, and I walked around. I got a respirator and fitted because we were fitting people with respirators. The air down here was heavy with acrid smoke and other things. And I walked around what was the World Trade Center. The scene was incredible. Whatever you saw on TV, and some of you are too young to watch TV at that time, but whatever you saw in terms of film and pictures cannot do justice to what your senses would see when you actually see it in 3D and feel it and walk around and hear the sounds. And the smell, the acrid smell that filled the air, that smell stayed with me the whole time we were down on the site with the smoke burning. I mean, you could see the destruction, and you could really feel, as you walked around, the loss of people and in the buildings. And that's what we were confronted with when we first came down here. There were thousands of us laboring on the site here. My job in particular was responsible for providing, supervising the removal of the material and allowing the police and fire who were searchers to search it in a safe way, because this was the most dangerous site, place I've ever worked on in my 30 years when I was working at that time. It was really, truly dangerous. Pieces of equipment. The buildings were hanging in the air 250 to 300 feet. 25 to 30 stories tall. Now, I don't know where you come from, but a 25 to 30-story building is probably pretty tall. That was hanging in pieces on two sides of the site. Smoke was coming out everywhere, and we were working, thousands of us, on shifts. 24/7 we worked. It was around the clock. Nothing ever shut down. And as we removed material, we searched it. We looked at it. I wasn't a searcher. The police and fire were searchers. If you look at some of the recovery material in the museum, they'll talk about that in the aftermath. So as we searched through all of this material, the camaraderie, the feeling here on the site between people on how they felt about being affronted by the attacks, everyone cooperated, everyone wanted to do something. I made friends, the camaraderie that you felt. People volunteered, came from all over the country. The Red Cross was here, the Salvation Army, God bless them, were here right away trying to provide comfort. People were trying to come and help us, couldn't because of the site. Providing food and water or whatever. There was so much food being provided. I actually lost weight because I lost 15 pounds in 4 weeks from walking around in distress and everything, even though there was food around. So we worked there for months, and the pile actually started to become what we called the pit. Okay, it started out as this humongous pile 150 feet into the air, and then it became an excavation that was 75 feet down below. And I remember in January, after a particularly bad day on the pile, actually it was almost a pit at that point, we were actually sitting over in O'Hara's in a bar, a couple of us having drinks, talking, thinking about what would happen at the end, like what would this be like being all over. And one of the guys sitting there, he says, when this is all over, when we get down to that last piece of the World Trade Center, I want to follow it on up that ramp and out of the site and just keep going. And we said, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And that is how the idea came about for the last column. And that's what the last column is. So as we excavated down, we got into a particular area in March, right around where Tower 2 was. And we had to build a ramp to get into the site because we were down what was now a pile, was now a pit, and we were traveling over all the debris, and under that debris, we knew there were remains and people, so we built the bridge. You'll see that if you go through the memorial, you'll see a ramp. That ramp was done so that we could excavate and search the rest of the site. And we got into what was then the lobby area of Tower 2. And we made an enormous amount of recoveries in that area, the most we did on the site, because all the first responders that Tom talked about seeing coming up in the stairs, well, they were also in the lobby of the building helping people and shuttling people out. And when the building collapsed, it trapped a lot of them and pushed them down, as well as civilians. And we had an understanding on the site. We came to an understanding that when you made a recovery was when you found a body. It would be wrapped in a flag, put in a body bag, but it would be wrapped in a flag. Chaplain would be called, and 6 people would take the gurney, carry that person out of the site behind the chaplain to an ambulance, and they'd be taken out, off. In the way it was handled, if you was a uniformed person, meaning a police or a fire person that was found, 6 firemen or 6 of his brother cops would carry that person out. If it was a civilian, like you or I, being civilian, just a normal person, and you were working on the site, 6 of us would get on that gurney and carry that person out. In April 11th of 2002, I carried out the last person they found on the site. It was a woman. We found her in the area where the North Tower was. It was the last area we were excavating. And I remember carrying that gurney up on the ramp and thinking, then the police had found her. They were doing the search. And I was thinking as I was going up the ramp, this person came to work that day just like you and I go to work, and now I'm carrying that body up a ramp. And that was someone's daughter, maybe someone's mother, someone's aunt, someone's aunt, and that person was never coming back again. So when you think about 9/11, you think about what it's all about and this beautiful memorial and museum we have. When you carry a body out of a the aftermath of 9/11, you know what 9/11 is all about. That's what it was about. And what happened then, as we continued with that excavation there in that area in where Tower 2 was, and we made these recoveries, someone put a bouquet of flowers next to the top of this column because they had lost someone there and had been recovered. And then someone wrote something on the top of the column. And then as we excavated down a little further, and we were taking the rest of the pile of debris down and searching it, someone else wrote something. And then someone wrote the police number of people killed, the number of civilians killed, the number of firemen killed. People started posting pictures on it as we excavated down. And we said, that's the last piece of steel, of material we're going to carry out of the site. And so in order so no one would cut it down, we actually welded a flag to the top because we knew no iron worker or construction worker would touch anything that had an American flag on it, out of respect. So that flag stayed there, and as we excavated down the site, and you could see pictures, we got down to what was the last column. And then one day, at the end of the recovery, it was actually May 28th in 2002, all of us workers that had been working on the site during the search and recovery came together that night, and we cut down the column and put it on a flatbed truck because 2 days later, the politicians had gotten together and said they were going to have their own ceremony, official closing ceremony. But the real closing ceremony at the end of the recovery was done on that evening on May 28th, when thousands of us gathered there at the end of all the work that we did 24/7. And as we marched up that ramp for the last time, up that piece, all along the ramp, all the way on both sides, never forget this, were all police and firemen that had been searching through the debris. And they standing in salute to thank all of us for all the support we had done. And that was a very touching moment. I often say and think about it that, in those events, in that terrible aftermath, it was such the worst of mankind came out in those terrorists flying those planes and killing all those innocent people. But in the response to 9/11, both around the country and especially here on the site, here in New York, the response showed the best that people can do. And that evening as we walked up that ramp, the best were there. Thank you for listening very much.
So both Tom and Peter have mentioned two major artifacts that you can see here in the museum. The survivor stairs that Tom used to get down from the elevated plaza of the World Trade Center. You can see that at the end of the ramp, survivor stairs. And then the last column is that one piece of steel standing upright, and it is full of the markings that Peter just described to you. Peter was here at the Trade Center full-time throughout the 9 months of the recovery effort, and then he worked on the rebuilding team until 2010. So both of these men are very well versed in this space, both what it once was and what it is now becoming. We always leave time at the end because we like this to be, as much as possible, not just us talking to you, but a conversation. So please just take a moment, think of any questions that you might want to ask either Peter or Tom, and they will be happy to answer them, I assure you. I'll give you a moment to just gather your thoughts. Okay, that's it. Who's first? Who's the brave soul? You must not be shy. It is not allowed.
We're not afraid of questions.
Good. Right here.
First, thank you both for your speaking. It was very touching, very moving. My question is actually for you, Peter. I work a lot with emergency responders after big catastrophes, and you by far have worked and headed one of the largest that in my lifetime. One thing we have a problem with is after big events like this, as you said, a lot of motivation, a lot of people come and try to help that aren't trained, are well-versed, but are passionate. And at least from my perspective and my experience, it can be difficult in trying to effectively manage those people, to get them involved, but not put them in harm's way or jeopardize your goals. So in your time working on the recovery, do you have any tips or do you have any lessons that you've learned in trying to get and harness everyone's emotions and excitement, but do it in a safe and effective way?
That's an interesting question.
Well, one thing we did right away in the first few days afterward, because everyone was flooding in, was there was a perimeter set up by the National Guard and the police, and you had to have identification to get onto the site. So that automatically cleared out getting some people that were just coming from all over that were trying to help but weren't trained or shouldn't be there. The second thing is I can say that some of the searchers, the police and fire, they went through a quick training themselves when they got on site. They were doing it in teams, the training. For the workers, the construction workers, we actually had we organized safety programs for the workers because, as I said, it was the most dangerous site. And we held meetings, coordination meetings, and it was crazy. In the morning at 8 o'clock and in the evening at 5 o'clock, and then at midnight we had another change. And there we discussed issues and to resolve them. And if there were safety issues, we resolved them. One of the things was when you had that meeting and discussion, everything was done real time. So there wasn't, we'll go back and study this and write up a paper on it to come back. You made a decision there, or you took it out in the field and you answered it, even on safety issues. So if a safety problem came up and someone wasn't operating in a way. So I would say, coordination, put safety immediately as part of a program, which was done there because of the site on everything, and it was focused on. And there was a team that focused just on safety and monitoring safety. And that kind of helped a lot on that. So that's what I would tell you to do.
Who else? Yes, please.
First of all, thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. I have a question. It doesn't really have to do with your field of expertise, but I'm a scholar, and I work at university on the military reaction to 9/11. And I was just wondering, you said at the beginning that it was really hard. What we saw on TV was not what you were experiencing on the side and on being here. So did you have the chance to read novels on 9/11? And if so, my question is not too personal. If you have read like Don DeLillo or Jonathan Safran Foer, how did you think that it was written? Did you enjoy? Could you relate to what they were writing, or was it very far from what you have experienced?
That is a fascinating question. We've not gotten that before. Basically, what was being asked is, because they both have had such personal connections to the aftermath of the events, have either of them read any fictionalized presentations of September 11th? And if they have, what are their thoughts in terms of authenticity, the fiction to the reality? Either of you, have you done that?
Actually, I've never read anything that's fiction on the site. I've seen documentaries. I've read some books about the events, but not fictionalized accounts.
Have either of you seen any of the films, the fictionalized films?
Well, those films were actually, the one I saw on the two Port Authority police officers that was killed was not actually fiction. I mean, it was based on a story. So, and some of it, anytime you make a film, no matter how true the story is, you deviate from what actually happened and embellish it so that it's interesting to an audience. And some of that happened in the film there. But that was pretty much a documentary almost based on it. So it wasn't really a fictionalized account like you would. It was actually pretty much on the kind that they followed.
I remember seeing that, though, and I thought one thing that I was struck with and that I remember about that movie was being inside the tower when Tower 2 collapsed. I felt like the way they depicted it was very
real.
It was pretty real, yeah, because I remember being curious how are they going to depict that, and that's the one thing that I remember about seeing that was I was sort of anxious to see that moment, and when it happened, I know I felt like, hey, that was pretty good.
Mm.
I'm only working on books and on fiction, and it's interesting because with my PhD, there's not a lot of work on that. Most of it is like work on film and movies, but it's very interesting.
What happened to all of the debris? 1.8 million tons. What was done with it?
The material on the site here was, you have to understand, it was a recovery operation after we declared it to be the rescue operation stopped about 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks into, After 9/11, we declared it that it was no longer a rescue operation, a recovery operation, which means we didn't expect to find anyone alive, but we tried to find people that had died. So the debris was searched here on site, and it was searched as we removed it by the police and firemen. They had spotters. All the material was then taken, and it was barged out to Staten Island, which is one of the boroughs or counties of New York, where there was an old landfill there, and it was reopened under an emergency order. And a hold operation was set out there, a whole mini city, to actually take that material and sift it and search it again to make sure for everything. So much so that, and the steel then, the massive amounts of steel were actually taken across to New Jersey, across there, and used and recycled. But the material, most of it, was taken out, searched, and then it was stockpiled in a safe area, in a park, it was going to become a park area out in Staten Island. So much so they sifted it that I was on the site here in October, and I got a call from the Port Authority police, and they said, "You Peter Rinaldi?" I said, "Yes." They said, "We found your ID from the World Trade Center." I said, "What do you mean you found my ID from the World?" It was on my desk. They found it. So they were sifting through, and they found my ID. They said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Well, we want to return it to you." I said, "No, we're coming to return it to you." So they came to the site. They were the police, and they came to the site, looked, gave them the ID. Now, they weren't returning my ID. What was happening was that there was so many unsubstantiated numbers about who perished and how many people perished. It started at 6,000, 5,000, 4,000. So they were trying, as they identified pictures or identification, they were trying to identify if that person was alive or dead or had been in the Trade Center. So that's why they were tracking down everything that they found it there. But it'll give you an idea of how detailed the search was here for that 1.8 million tons. You had a question?
A question for Tom.
Mhm.
Thank you both, gentlemen.
Sure.
Very fascinating. You said that you were calm as you moved down, and I'm assuming that most people were also relatively calm. And I wonder whether it was sort of in the minds of people that, gee, this possibly could happen sometime. A plane could hit this building, it's so tall. Did you ever think, or with your coworkers think, that what would we do should, a plane hit the building? Because I remember thinking that as I saw,
Yeah.
having lunch once up in town.
Yeah, I worked here for about 15 years. I guess you might think of it a little bit once in a while. A plane hit the Empire State Building in the 1940s, I believe. So it can happen. And there had been the bombing in '93. I happened to be out to lunch at that moment, but a lot of people that I worked with went through that. So we certainly knew things could happen.
Did you have drills?
Yeah, well, yes, we had fire drills, and so we all certainly knew where the egress stair was in case of an emergency, or even a building like that, if there was a fire or something more routine, so to speak. I think that summer or the summer before, there had been some like a small blackout in Lower Manhattan, and we had to walk out. So I had walked out of the building at least one other time. But yeah, as I said, once we got into the stairs and the initial sort of panic subsided, the conditions were totally normal, and everybody kind of calmed down. And after those first 3 or 5 minutes, it was a very cooperative, semi-good-natured kind of a New York moment, working our way out.
Maybe mention something real quick. In '93 bombing, which I was there, I actually was there. I got trapped in an elevator for 4 hours before getting out. But after '93, we made some improvements to the building. You kind of learn, besides not allowing vehicles into the underground any longer. But the stairs in '93 were totally black because the power went out and you couldn't see. So you were walking down, and the stairs filled with smoke. Subsequent to that, the emergency lighting, battery emergency lighting, was put throughout the Trade Center in the stairwells. There was luminescent strips put on all the stairs and the hand railings, and a ventilation system was put in for the stairwells. And then there was evacuation drills. There were actually drills. Besides the fire drills, there were actually evacuation drills with the idea of something happening. I think that contributed to the saving of lives in 2001, because Tom was coming down through a stairway that had lighting in it and so forth, you know. Plus, people had practiced where the stairwells were and had done some evacuation. We actually evacuated the building once before for a bomb scare, so people had gone through that. And I think that was partially helpful. We had fire drills and periodic drills every so many months. So I think that was helpful.
Let me invite all of you to continue this, if you would like, right outside the exit. So I'm just going to now thank both of the boys here, and I want to thank all of you as well. It was very appreciated that you chose to spend some of your time with us today. So thank you all very much.